Today we embark on a 40-day journey with Jesus into the desert. I am reminded of another journey I took some years ago of about the same length. It was a journey not into a desert, but to South America. I enjoyed that entire journey except for 3 days of it, because on 3 separate occasions on that journey I became sick. The first time I fell ill was because I ate something I shouldn't have and came down with indigestion. Now, I like to eat whatever the local people eat. In some corners of the world, that includes such things as grasshoppers, worms, caterpillars, and other appetizing delicacies. I have eaten horse, armadillo, beaver, ants, beetles, and fried tarantulas. So go figure, I got indigestion, and I didn't enjoy that day. The second time I got sick was in the very high city of Cusco, which is 11,000 feet above sea level. I came down with what most travelers there get, altitude sickness. My head was throbbing, I couldn't breathe, and the doctor had to come in the middle of the night with oxygen. I didn't enjoy that day either. The third time I got sick during that long journey, I was just plain exhausted. I don't know if it was heat exhaustion or just travel exhaustion, but I felt that I could not go on. I felt like I wanted it to end. I didn't enjoy that day either, but the rest of the trip was great. Hearing of Jesus' 40-day sojourn in the desert, I am reminded of those 3 times I became ill during my trip. Jesus is faced with 3 parallel temptations. The first temptation we hear about is when he is tempted to consume something not fit for human consumption. It wasn't a caterpillar or even a tarantula. It was a pile of stones. He was tempted to eat those because he was hungry, and the temptation was to think that in my hands it will become something edible because I am special. That paralleled my indigestion. The second time Jesus was tempted was when he was taken up to a mountain and he looked over all the high kingdoms of the world. He was tempted to thirst for power. He was tempted to rise. He was tempted to be a climber. Altitude sickness. The third temptation was when he went to the parapet of the temple and was tempted to end it all by throwing himself down. These are the 3 great temptations of humanity. We all go through them. The first is to consume things, use things in our life that were not meant for our nourishment. Perhaps it is alcohol or other drugs. Perhaps it is diversions which may indeed fill a hole in our belly or in our soul, but are not nourishing and certainly do not help us to grow. We look to the wrong kind of spiritual food, and we end up with spiritual indigestion. We try to satiate our souls with something that can never fill them, something other than God. This is the first temptation, and it is one that all of us face. The second great temptation of humanity is altitude sickness, the thirst for power, looking up at the kingdoms of the world, as Jesus did, and wanting it all for ourselves, wanting to lord it over other people, wanting to have power over others. Perhaps you have worked under someone like that, or worked with someone like that. It is not a pleasant experience. People with this altitude sickness, always wanting to go higher and higher, often get into politics, or worse, use the church for their own advancement. Altitude sickness. You go too high and it goes to your head. Altitude sickness. The second great temptation of humanity. The third temptation is the worst and most painful of all. The temptation not to place ourselves higher, but to cast ourselves down. The temptation to despair. The temptation to quit. The temptation that I cannot go on any further. I want it all to end. The temptation to make it all end. These moments of despair, of discouragement, of depression can last a brief second, but they can also last for years. That is a terrible feeling, a terrible temptation. How extraordinary that Jesus himself faced these same three temptations of humanity, that he took on our nature with all its weaknesses and all its temptations. How wonderful that Jesus understands us personally because of that. Let us go with him into the desert. Allow him to accompany us through our desert journey of life, knowing every time we are tempted that he knew that temptation too, knowing that every time we commit an act of virtue, he knew that as well, knowing that every time we stand in need of forgiveness, he is ready to forgive because he understands. Let us walk with Jesus into the desert we call human life, and with him rise triumphant over it all.